On July 27, 1974, Cass Elliot, better known to the world as Mama Cass, whose powerhouse lead vocals were the engine behind the legendary Laurel Canyon band the Mamas and the Papas, took the stage at the prestigious London Palladium for the final night of a 2-week slate of solo performances. The engagement marked a major milestone in her professional life, as Elliot tried to establish herself as a solo artist and break free of the enormous shadow cast by the success of the Mamas and the Papas. The performances were well received, leaving Cass with a renewed sense of confidence and optimism about her career prospects. Friends and collaborators noted how energized she seemed on stage, basking in the applause and standing ovation she received on the final night. Behind the scenes, she was hopefully planning a triumphant return to the United States, riding the renewed momentum of her London shows. The Mamas and the Papas emerged from the heart of the 1960s Laurel Canyon music scene, a creative haven nestled in the Hollywood Hills where artists like Joni Mitchell, Jim Morrison, and members of the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield were doing lots of drugs and quite literally reimagining American music. Formed in 1965, the group, consisting of John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, Denny Doherty, and Cass Elliot, quickly became known for their lush harmonies, bohemian image, and deeply personal songwriting. Their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was an instant success, featuring the now iconic hit California Dreamin'. And anyone who's heard the song can tell you that the band's meteoric rise was largely attributable to Cass's soaring vocals, which not only created the group's trademark dreamy, melancholic sound, but also helped define the identity of the burgeoning counterculture on the West Coast. Beyond their musical achievements, the Mamas and the Papas helped usher in a new cultural consciousness. Their image, equal parts carefree and complicated, embodied the spirit of the 1960s with its experimentation, idealism, and emotional openness. The band helped bridge the folk revival of the early 60s with groups like Peter, Paul, and Mary that turned into the pop revolution that followed and eventually culminated in mega hitmakers like Fleetwood Mac. Their music became the soundtrack to a rapidly changing America where civil rights, the Vietnam War, and a generational rift collided with a newfound hunger for personal and artistic freedom. As central figures in this Laurel Canyon scene, they weren't just making hits, they were helping shape the sound and soul of an era. But like many bands of the era, there was a dysfunctional relationship between the members and their respective roles, leaving Cass riddled with self-doubt about whether she'd ever be taken seriously as a solo artist after they broke up in 1968. The London shows marked a huge step forward in recasting her image for the next leg of her life in music. And it hadn't been an easy road. Behind the scenes, Cass was contending with years of physical and emotional strain. Though she appeared upbeat and full of life on stage, she had battled with significant health issues, including a history of crash dieting that had put stress on her body. She was now entering her early 30s and still battling weight issues, which also wreaked havoc on her mental health as she battled naysayers in an industry preoccupied with image and youth. Friends later recalled that Elliot seemed exhausted and possibly under the weather in her final days, but nothing that signaled a dire emergency. Emotionally, Cass had long carried the burden of being underestimated by critics, label executives, and even some peers, and that struggle to prove her worth was ever present. Nevertheless, she kept a brave and cheerful front, often joking about her public persona and trying to move forward with her creative ambitions. She would never make it home to the States after those London shows. On the morning of July 29, 1974, Cass was found dead in the London flat she borrowed from singer Harry Nilsson. Mama Cass was just 32 years old. I'm Derek Kaufman.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And this is Last Days, Mama Cass.
Elliot's official cause of death was heart failure, and there were no drugs found in her system. Despite the relatively straightforward findings from the coroner, for years a persistent, and it turns out wholly inaccurate, rumor circulated about the singer choking to death on a ham sandwich, a cruel punchline about her weight that overshadowed a life of immense talent, cultural significance, and quiet pain. Elliot's daughter, Owen Hendricks, steadfastly debunked the rumor, insisting that her mother passed peacefully in her sleep from a heart attack. To be fair, her daughter was just 7 years old at the time of her mother's death, and many still question her account of what happened. Even as recently as Austin Powers movies, the ham sandwich story has persisted as a lazy gag about the many deaths of pop artists in the 1960s.
Deceased. Drugs. Janis Joplin. Deceased. Alcohol. Mama Cass. Deceased. Ham sandwich.
Regardless of the enduringly tawdry appeal of the apocryphal story behind her death, what can't be denied is that the timing of her passing was truly tragic, coming at a moment when Elliot truly seemed poised for a second act, having just completed a triumphant 2-week solo engagement at the London Palladium. After years of being cast as the comic relief, or the odd one out in a world obsessed with image, Cass was finally stepping into the spotlight on her own terms.
Jason, I have to, in poring over sort of the archival articles about Cass's death, that ham sandwich story is little more than just this really cruel and mean-spirited joke about an overweight musician. There is absolutely no validity to it.
Right, didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Yeah.
She didn't die from choking on a ham sandwich. Yet, when I was a kid, and I'm sure when you were a kid, this was
times.
what persisted. And you know, there is evidence that at the scene, there was a ham sandwich. As in any coroner's report, they note what is around. Are there pill bottles overturned? Is there a ham sandwich nearby? It played no role. She didn't choke on it. She was overweight. This was, she's in an industry that is obsessed with image and glamour, and she was always sort of the punchline. She had this great talent, but she was
overweight and
figure.
She wasn't sort of in this day and age. Now we talk about body positivity. That was not the case then, and she was really overweight, and she was openly teased and mocked for it. Right? This was Mama Cass. Would have been described even by people who were not criticizing her as overweight, and that was ubiquitous in all the news stories. The story about the ham sandwich just came to sort of, I don't know, exemplify all of the sort of anti-fat attitudes that we had at the time, this willingness to speak openly about people who struggle with weight issues.
Yeah, look, she wasn't a sex symbol. Even her nickname, Mama Cass, was about, she's the heavy one. She must be maternal and nurturing towards people in the Laurel Canyon scene. And she was sort of a mentor role, but she was in this band with Michelle Phillips, who's drop dead gorgeous and was a very big sex symbol of the 1960s. And that must have been so difficult. And for her life to have just been reduced to this joke after she was just these powerhouse vocals. She was a very complicated person, very, very bright. Struck me as very sad.
It's interesting historically. I've never thought about this until this moment, but there is this effort to sum people up into a single apocryphal event of their life. I think of Marie Antoinette, that let them eat cake. Never happened. It didn't happen. It was a quote that was used for years before that to make fun of the rich as they would, and sort of that summarized her entire life. And I'm sure if I were to think about it, I haven't thought about this before. There are other examples like that where just things that are truly false.
Yeah.
And we use them as sort of a crutch in order to sum up somebody's life. And Mama Cass, to a lot of people, was just the heavyweight singer, and she died of a ham sandwich, kind of just served to exemplify that entire thing. It's
true.
Very sad. It's very sad. And in her case, I don't really shed a tear for Marie Antoinette.
Yeah,
but for Mama Cass, it's very sad. Anna Nightingale, a prominent British radio host, celebrated Elliot's impact as a pioneering figure for women in rock who paved the way for artists like Janis Joplin and Grace Slick to assume prominent roles in a genre largely defined by charismatic and exuberant leading men like Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones and Roger Daltrey of The Who.
But Cass Elliot was more than just the soulful contralto behind California Dreamin' and Monday Monday. She was the glue that held together one of the most iconic groups of the 1960s, both musically and emotionally. With her sharp wit, enormous heart, and unmatched vocal control, she brought warmth and weight to every song the group recorded. But as the group fractured under the pressures of fame, infidelity, and substance abuse, Cass, like so many of her era, was left to pick up the pieces. Before finding some acclaim towards the end of her life, Cass released several underappreciated albums in the early 70s and appeared regularly on television, but found herself battling not just the industry, but a public and press that often reduced her to a punchline and demeaned her over her weight struggles, or condescended and pigeonholed her, reducing her to just another has-been. Despite their messy breakup, her passing didn't go unnoticed by her former bandmates, including Michelle Phillips, who honored her friend with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2022.
The Mamas and the Papas hold a pivotal place in music history as one of the definitive voices of the 1960s counterculture era. With their signature 4-part harmonies, emotionally resonant lyrics, and a unique fusion of folk, pop, and rock, they crafted a sound that was both of its time and timeless. The group's ability to blend folk sincerity with pop accessibility in a series of hits like Monday Monday, Go Where You Want to Go, and California Dreamin' helped bridge the gap between the acoustic introspection of the early 60s folk and the electronic experimentation of late 60s rock, making them a vital part of the American musical tapestry. This is perhaps no better exemplified than in the perfect folk harmonies in a song like Monday Monday. The song is stitched together with perfect vocal blending, but it also somehow feels effortless and breezy. This is not easy to do. They're doing complicated synchronized singing, but the song still feels dreamlike and perfectly of a place with the hippie vibes of the era. They not only topped charts, California Dreamin' peaked at number 4 in the US, and Monday Monday became a number 1 hit for the band in 1966 and earned them a Grammy for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group, but captured the longing, optimism, and melancholy that defined a generation on the cusp of radical social change. The band drew inspiration from earlier folk acts like the Kingston Trio and the Weavers, but infused their sound with lush studio production and, for lack of a better word, California cool. In turn, the Mamas and the Papas directly influenced a wide array of artists that followed, including Fleetwood Mac, the Carpenters, and later, indie folk artists such as the First Aid Kit and the Lumineers. The blend of tight harmonies, emotional vulnerability, and sun-soaked arrangements laid the groundwork for generations of bands who sought to marry lyrical depth with broad pop appeal. But beyond the music itself, the band represented something larger going on in the culture, the emergence of strong women at the center of the rock scene. With her girl next door, sun-kissed beauty and ethereal voice, Michelle Phillips emerged as a fan favorite, earning the attention of male fans due to her looks while still maintaining credibility for her talent.
But Mama Cass was something entirely different, an undeniable talent who couldn't fall back on the male gaze and earned respect through her incredible vocals and endearingly nurturing personality, which eventually turned her into a sort of unofficial den mother for the Laurel Canyon scene, which gave her name. Her home was a legendary hangout for the counterculture elite, and stories of late-night jam sessions, drug-fueled parties, and broken hearts still swirl around the Canyon Hills. But Cass's own struggles with loneliness, body image, and the shifting tides of musical taste haunted her, even as she smiled brightly for the cameras. And if you see archival footage of Mama Cass, I don't want to make her sound like she was an outwardly tormented person. This was a band that was sunny. They were Southern California cool.
Right.
So they would sing these harmonies. She would dress in those, sort of iconic 60s outfits,
Flowing,
the flowery dresses.
Picturing Stevie Nicks, but just
Yes.
a different, obviously different body shape and sort of different vibe, but very similar outfits.
Very similar
That
look.
gypsy chic.
Yes, and she wasn't sort of angsty in any
Yes.
way as a performer, but behind the scenes, she was facing all of this because she was the heavyset one of the group, and everyone else was sort of just beautiful.
Yeah.
For lack of
I want to just talk about how influential she was and how she had this name Mama because she was the den mother and she was revered by all of these other artists. Remember when we did Janis Joplin, one of the big moments in Janis Joplin's life when she played the Monterey Jazz Festival in
Monterey Pop Festival.
in 1968 maybe it was. I can't remember exactly, 67. But the big thing was that Mama Cass was in the audience and she saw Janis Joplin and she gave Janis her stamp of approval. And by that point, Mama Cass was one of the biggest artists in the world, and she was also kind of the queen of folk and rock, this blending of folk and rock. And Mama Cass, when she said this woman is somebody to watch for, she became huge. I just saw the movie Complete Unknown. Have you seen that?
I did.
And she is prominently featured in that as somebody who was right there at the vanguard of the folk movement into pop and rock. And she's watching because Bob Dylan is going through this transformation. And she's sort of cheering him along. She's really important in Bob Dylan's life, Janis Joplin's life, and every other artist of the time.
You're right. It's a great comp, too, to bring up Janis Joplin, who is a powerhouse vocalist herself, but was more sort of confrontational. She was beer swilling. She was a lot of fun to be around. Mama Cass had this sort of nurturing quality to her that fit her differently into the scene. I think she was seen as someone who was a mentor to people, whereas Janis Joplin was a soaring
mentor
talent.
to no person.
Yeah, she was just a train wreck in a lot of respects. Still, behind this idyllic Laurel Canyon scene and the timeless classics coming out of the studio was a group plagued by internal turmoil and emotional instability. Romantic entanglements, jealousy, infidelity, and substance abuse created a toxic atmosphere that ultimately led to the band's unraveling. John and Michelle Phillips' rocky marriage was a constant source of tension, exacerbated by Michelle's affairs with Gene Clark of the Byrds and then with fellow bandmate Denny Doherty, a betrayal that got Phillips briefly kicked out of the band and also affected Cass, who harbored unrequited feelings for Doherty herself. So even as much as they influenced a band like Fleetwood Mac, they also mirrored them.
I was just, as you were talking about this, I'm like, I didn't really know these backstories until now, and Fleetwood Mac's story is so similar to this, like infighting, dating within the band, leading to terrible breakups, leading to the eventual demise of the band that could have been so much more had it stayed together for another 10 years.
Great art comes from dysfunction, they say, and both bands had it in spades. And the entanglements, combined with the mounting pressures of fame and John Phillips' intense perfectionist tendencies clashing with Elliot's more fun-loving temperament, led to a series of breakups and reunions until the band finally dissolved for good in 1968, just 3 years after their meteoric rise. They seemed like a band who has been around and produced a lot of music. It was really a short period of time,
obviously,
but it was incredible.
As we'll talk about in a minute, Mama Cass dies very shortly after this period. You have to believe they would have done what Fleetwood Mac did, right?
Yes.
Just come back together for various stints and continue to make great music, or at least sing the great hits they had, but never given that opportunity.
It's so true.
Following the group's breakup, each member attempted to forge a solo path, but none more prominently or successfully than Cass Elliot. Elliot's powerful voice and magnetic personality had made her a fan favorite during the band's run, and she seemed best poised for stardom on her own. Her solo career began with promise, including headlining gigs in Las Vegas and performances in The Ed Sullivan Show. Her debut album, Dream a Little Dream of Me, showcased her vocal range and flair for theatricality, moving away from the folk-pop confines of the Mamas and Papas and into a more jazz-influenced cabaret style. The title track, which showcases flawless and inimitable vocals, has become a standard.
Stars shining bright above you, night breezes seem to whisper, I love you. Birds singing in the sycamore tree. Dream a little dream of me.
The song also showed the breadth of her ambition. Cass not only wanted to be recognized not just as a great singer, but as a full-fledged entertainer. Despite her immense talent and popularity, Cass faced persistent challenges in her solo career. Critics often downplayed her artistry, focusing instead on her weight and eccentric public persona. Just listen to this introduction for an interview with Russell Hardy, followed by a snippet of Cass talking about her transition from the band to a solo career just 2 years before her death.
Now, here is a big lady, bigger in the United States than she is here. She has an IQ of 160, and she has deep misgivings about publicity, and she's suspicious of giving interviews. She is Cass Elliot, Mama Cass, that was.
You have to realize that if I had the image of being a hippie-type person, I've been in the business for 13 years. I certainly didn't start off that way. I achieved fame and notoriety through that kind of offbeat group that I was in. So I can't say that I'm slithering back into the establishment. I think I always really was part of the establishment. I was in musical comedy theater, and someone forgot to tell me that it died. And
It's jaw-dropping to hear the way he introduces her as the biggest thing, and he's making a joke about her weight. This is a woman who's coming on his show to be interviewed.
Listening to this.
It was a very, very different time, but she was of that era where it was okay to make these sort of pot shots and then just come out and talk to her sort of dismissively.
This era, I think, lasted honestly up until maybe the 2010s. I mean, we are now so into body positivity. I think it's a great advent. You can't help but think of a singer like Lizzo who has really embraced the body positivity. She does what she wants with her own weight, but there's no criticism leveled at her from mainstream circles. There are sort of the Twitter sphere that makes fun of large people all the time.
You're right.
But it would be beneath us as a media organization or any media organization to or an interviewer to sort of bring it up in that way and make fun of people and have it serve as a punchline for that person's life. It's just I'm glad.
I'm glad that era is behind us.
Me too. Hopefully we don't go back. We've sort of retreated on so many different things. Hopefully this is not one of them. Hopefully we stick with this kind of body positivity.
This is progress.
Cass battled persistent health issues and the industry skepticism while trying to reinvent herself outside of the shadow of her former band. Still, she maintained a loyal fan base and was beloved by many of her contemporaries, including Crosby, Stills and Nash and Joni Mitchell. And despite her death, Elliot's influence has endured. as she became a symbol of both musical brilliance and the bittersweet fragility of fame in an era that produced more than its share of casualties.
And although her most enduring classics were sung as a member of the Mamas and the Papas, we would be remiss to ignore Elliot's solo efforts. Indeed, this solo work has recently undergone a critical reappraisal, and many believe she simply outgrew and improved upon her earlier work with the band as a solo artist, which is really saying something given the importance of those songs from the Mamas and the Papas. Modern artists still cite her as a vocal inspiration, and her story has become a touchstone in conversations about body positivity, mental health, and the pressures of fame. Her daughter Owen has dedicated her life to preserving Cass's legacy and undoing the damage left in the wake of those tabloid headlines. Cass Elliott's death in London was not just tragic, it became instantly mythologized into an ugly legend that overshadowed a brilliant, albeit short, career. The ham sandwich rumor became a tabloid sensation and stuck around for decades, reducing a great artist whose voice had elevated American pop music into something transcendent, into little more than an undignified punchline. Her death laid bare an ugly truth about how the media, and more broadly society, treated women who didn't fit the mold of conventional beauty standards, no matter how brilliant or beloved they were. Yet despite the gossip, the mockery, and the fat jokes that plagued her public image, Elliot's musical legacy has only grown stronger over time. She helped define one of the most important eras in rock history, both as an artist and as a symbol of how even the brightest stars can be dimmed by society's narrow expectations. Her voice, rich, haunting, unforgettable, still soars above the noise. And so I wanted to give the final word to one of the people who knew her best, bandmate Michelle Phillips, heard here fondly recalling just how special Mama Cass was as an artist behind one of America's most influential bands.
And I remember when we were playing Carnegie Hall, she of course sang the lead on Dream a Little Dream. And for some reason, she had never done this before. Went down to the apron of the stage, and she sat down with her legs dangling over the side of the apron of the stage, and she sang Dream a Little Dream of Me. I swear it made me cry. And it was a song that was just tailor-made for her.